Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I have one last lightweight dress to share with you before we finally venture into the wools. So this one is made from a cotton sateen. It has princess lines, puffy sleeves, long puffy sleeves, and a nice little tie collar, which you can style in a variety of ways. Some of them I will show you at the end of the video. I opted out of hand sewing for this project because the fabric is so thin that my hand stitches, while sewing the facings down, would probably show anyway on the outside. So I top stitched the whole facing into place. So if you're not that into hand sewing, which is totally fine, maybe this is a method you are interested in. Keep watching. So without further ado, let's grab a pattern and make this dress. So the pattern is available on my website for free. You can simply follow the link below the video or you go to dressdeveloper.de, pattern kits, to the princess line dress. And here I will make some changes. You don't actually need to follow what I'm doing right now, because in the link in the description, if you follow this, you will have all the settings I'm making here done for you. So I'm going for the English seams, fit category 5, that means a little bit more ease. So sleeves, I am using the sleeve with cuff and placket. The sleeve head, I go for a wide fit. And I will add 12 centimeters as gathers and 12 centimeters as gathers for the cuff, which means gathers here. Placket, I want the placket with tape. That's the simple style. I'll increase the sleeve cuff height to 6 centimeters and I increase the length of the sleeve, which will lead to a slightly puffed sleeve at the wrist. So now I select the tie collar, buttons in front, and of course pockets. So all I need to do now is to select a size. You can also upload your measure set with your very own measurements. Then I add seam allowance and then I can create the pattern. Little second. Don't forget to download the cover. This includes informations about all the settings you just made, an overview of the pattern parts, and a printing layout. And here is the actual pattern, ready for printing. So I have laid out my pattern pieces on 4 meters of cotton sateen. And I will walk you through this. Here is the front inner panel, back inner panel, the front facing, and not to forget an additional pocket piece drawn out there, because I need to cut that twice. Here are all the additional facing pieces, the cuff, the second pocket piece. Here's the sleeve and the collar. The fabric at this side is folded over so that I can cut 2 of the collar pieces in one go. Sadly, I needed to shorten the collar piece a little bit so it does fit on the fabric, and I don't need to piece anything. I think this length will be fine. So I'm going to cut all of this, but as you see, it's almost a perfect fit. Again, actually I'm very good at puzzling, it seems. And yeah, let's go on. First thing after cutting is interfacing. I interface the cuffs and the neckline facings with some light fusible interfacing. The front facing gets interfaced over the full length because this will strengthen the buttonholes later on. Then I prepare the cuffs by pressing them in half with the right sides on the inside. And on one side the seam allowance is pressed up. On to more prep work. I'm trying to batch my tasks. So here I am taking all the small little things and making them into slightly larger things. So at first I take the two color pieces, lay them on top of each other with the right sides facing each other, and then I sew almost all around. There are some notches on the color, so in the first go I will sew until the outer notch on each side, and when I reach the outer notch I will curve slightly to the outside. Yes, there are notches on this thing, keep looking, you will find them. There they are. So here I'm showing you how I will sew this, indicating the curve I just mentioned. Then I prepare the slit for the sleeve. I have cut some 4 cm wide strips from the fabric. You can also use pre-made bias tape for this. I have cut a slit of 10 cm in the sleeve, and then I line up a strip of fabric with the slit, folding the slit open. When you sew this, the seam allowance will taper to almost nothing in the middle where the slit ends, and then widen again to about 1 cm. Then the strip of fabric is folded over the raw edges and stitched again. Then I join all the dress panels into one back and 2 front pieces. There are several notches over the length of the panels, so I join the notches and of course the beginning and the end, and then I distribute everything in between evenly. Same procedure for the front. Naturally, the front has a little bit more curve to it than the back. When you line these curves up, remember that you want to line up the sewing line, not the seam allowance. We will handle the seam allowance later. Now we have all the facing pieces left. First, I join the front and the back neckline facings and sew them at the shoulder. Then I join all the hem facings in the round. Make sure to mark all the pieces so you don't mix them up. They might look similar, but they don't need to be. Now onto the sewing machine. First I sew the color. Here you can see how I curve into the color at the notch. And then all around up until the next notch. Where I curve out again. Then I join all the little facing pieces. 2, 3, I think you got it. Same for the dress panels. Always remember, don't stretch anything. And here I'm sewing the strip of fabric to the slit in the sleeve. First one side. Then I fold the fabric over and stitch it again. You can do this step by hand if you're worried to catch everything on the back. Great camera work, but here's a glimpse of what it should look like. The short ends of the sleeve cuffs get sewn. And then we round up the prep stage by sewing all the facings together. The neckline and the hem facings come together in a 45-degree angle. This will create some nice metered corners. Let me sew this up real quick. Then I sew a line of stay stitching on the inside of the facing. The seam allowance get folded open as I go. Enough for the sewing machine for the moment, and up to my highly aesthetic ironing board. The seam allowance of the collar gets trimmed all around. The corners get clipped twice, so everything has enough room when I turn this inside out. In the curves, I snip into the seam allowance to release the tension. Then the collar gets turned inside out and pressed. I use an old folding tool to poke out the corners, but a pen or a knitting needle will do the job. Here you can see how the seam allowance turns. The part of the seam allowance which is still open will later be sandwiched between the facing and the dress. The cuffs get treated likewise. The seam allowance is cut, the cuff is turned inside out and pressed. Then I press the seam allowance of the main dress pieces open. The curved bits are pressed open over a tailor's ham. That's a stuffed little pillow and it helps shaping this part. Now you will notice that the seam allowance puckers a bit over the bust, and that's why I take my scissors and cut little triangles out of the seam allowance, so that the seam allowance may lay flat. I will later serge the seam allowance, but if you don't have a serger and are using a zigzag stitch to finish the edge, I suggest you don't cut little triangles out, but some sort of a wave pattern, so you can follow this wave with the zigzag stitch. Now to this little fabric snake, which is the facing. You remember that stay stitching I made? Now I will snip the curves at this edge and press the seam allowance under. The line of stitching acts as a guide for this. On to the next station, finishing most of the seam allowance. I very carefully searched over the seam allowance of the dress panels. I definitely don't want to catch or even cut anything I'm not supposed to. I also search around all the pocket pieces. I like to completely prepare them before I set them in the side seam. Then I sew 2 and 2 pocket pieces together, leaving the seam allowance at the beginning and the end open. I also search the sides of the sleeves and sew a line of gathering stitches at the top and the wrist. There's just a line of very long stitches, which I will use to gather the sleeves later, and I sew them inside the seam allowance, so I don't need to bother getting them out later. Time to begin assembling. First, I sew the shoulder seams. Then I set in the sleeves. Here's the armhole, and here are the notches, 1 notch for the front, 2 notches for the back. There's a notch on the top of the sleeve, which I will line up with the shoulder. And then I join the single notch on the sleeve with a single notch on the dress, and the double notch on the sleeve with a double notch on the dress. Then I pull on the gathering stitches to ease the sleeve into the armhole. The sleeve gets sewn into place with a sewing machine. And then serged. Before I can sew the side seam, I need to determine the position of the pockets, and I will mark that with pins. About 1 hand width below the waist. Then I will sew from the wrist to the hem, leaving the place for the pockets open. Then I can set in the pockets by sewing the seam allowance of a pocket to the seam allowance of a dress. Starts to look like a dress. Now I pin the collar in place, lining up the notches with the shoulder seams. On top of the collar, I place the facing and pin all around. Note that the ends of the collar hang free. Then I sew the facing into place. Back to the ironing board, where I cut the seam allowance back and snip the corners. Then the facing gets pressed and pinned into place. Then the facing is stitched down all around. Alright, what's left now are the cuffs. I gather up the wrist part of the sleeves and then I pin the cuff in place. Now the cuffs will overlap for 2 centimeters, so I thought it would be a great idea to pin the sleeve short of 2 centimeters in one side, so it would close edge to edge. But I'm not so sure that this was a good idea now, because the sleeve slits are gaping a little bit, so maybe you just pin it edge to edge. I sew inside the cuff, close to the edge where I folded the seam allowance over, you remember? Then I snip back the fuzzy bits and fold the cuff over the raw edges. This gets pinned in place and sewn on around. Last step, buttonholes and buttons. Sorry for the focus here, my camera was having a moment. Yes, you can also sew a button on with the machine. The buttons are taped in place because I don't have a button pressure foot, and all you need is a zigzag stitch with 0 stitch length. And then the dress is done. So let me show you how you can style this collar. You can simply tie it and maybe put a brooch in it. Or you can add a little strip of fabric with buttons on both ends. This one is 13 centimeters long and 4 centimeters wide. And you can use it, for example, to tie the collar into a little cravat. Or into a bow. Don't mind my faces, this is not so easy when you're not exactly seeing what you're doing. Yes, a mirror would be helpful. The little finder in my camera is not enough. Of course, you can also tie the collar into a real bow, but I think it is a bit short for that. And here is a full view of a finished dress. I think this simple style is my favorite, though the cravat and the bow are cute too. What style would you prefer? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'm looking forward to see you in my next one. Bye!